Hi everybody, my name's Eoin O'Callaghan and I'm with the Elizabeth Bowen Society, and I'm here today to talk about a book. Here's the book. It's The Last Day at Bowen's Court by Eibhear Walshe. And on the line from Cork, I've got Eibhear Walshe. Good morning, Eibhear.
Hi, Owen. How are you? Thanks.
I'm very
Lovely to
well,
see you.
thanks.
Great
Yeah,
to see you.
likewise.
Thanks for setting this up.
No, you're more than welcome. My pleasure. Eibhear, the book has been released about two and a half weeks ago, I think.
Yes.
And unfortunately, you weren't able to launch it formally due to the COVID-19 circumstances we're in at the moment. So how does it feel to be launching essentially a COVID-19, a lockdown novel?
Well, initially I was a bit depressed because I got the first copy from the publishers, which is very kind, and it looks great, and I'm delighted. And I couldn't launch it, but in fact, it's getting out there. I was talking to the publishers this morning, and people are buying it on Amazon. People are buying it online. There's a piece about it in the Irish Times, and Royal Irish Academy have done a piece about Bowen herself, and it's been chosen as a book club choice for two different book clubs. So in a time of lockdown where I was, longing to see the novel just to get out there and people to read it. In fact, it's getting readers already. And like yourself, it's
Yeah.
very kind of you. I'm interacting now with the Bowen Society. So I feel much better about it because, when you write a novel, okay, you'd like to have 4 million readers, but actually 20 or one, someone to have read it, like hopefully we're going to do today, and say, well, what about this? What about that? That's absolutely what you long for as a writer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I can actually see that it is getting a lot of traction online. And in a way, when we are in lockdown, people are more focused online. So it's great that we're able to actually do this. Like everyone is changing how they do things. So even though, you weren't able to have the launch party, we were able to have this instead.
Yes.
So, I mean, to me, I read this book very much as a tribute to Bowen on many different levels. So I suppose, what drew you to telling this particular story and focusing on these four characters? Elizabeth Bowen herself, Charles Ritchie, his wife Sylvia, and Elizabeth's husband, Alan Cameron.
I suppose having worked on her as a critic and also loving her work and reading her avidly, the whole publication of The Heat of the Day has always fascinated me. How can you write a novel dedicated to your lover, publish it while living with your husband in the year that your lover marries? So it struck me that we know a little bit about a lot about Bowen's own feelings towards Ritchie and much about his towards her. We don't know is how did Alan Cameron and Sylvia Ritchie sort of deal with that world? And I mean, this is one of the things that fascinated me. The untold story behind the publication of, I think, one of the greatest novels ever written during a period of intense creativity for Bowen. So how did the people who lived through this, how did it work for them? And this is a novel. It's my imagining of what happened, but it's in no way the answer. But I suppose I also got to do something which I loved, which is by writing the novel, I went back there and I met her. I've always wanted to meet her, as you do, someone you admire so much. And I feel imaginatively that I've met her.
Yeah, no, that's very fair, and that comes out. It comes out in the novel very much. I mean, you've obviously you've got we've got writings by Charles Ritchie, and obviously we've got Elizabeth Bowen's body of work, and she's obviously been very well biographies about her, very in-depth biographies written about her over time. But we've less about Alan Cameron and Sylvia. In fact, I'm not sure if we have any apart from maybe surmising how they live their lives. I mean, how did you imagine their worlds and their part in this story?
I suppose what I did was I imagined that I was all four characters at one point. You have to. So, as you know with the novel, I give different chapters to different characters. So it's focalized through either the consciousness of Elizabeth Bowen herself or Charles Ritchie, and they have quite a lot. But in fact, I also imagine it through Alan Cameron's eyes, and I have another chapter imagining through Sylvia Ritchie's eyes. And I suppose I had to place myself in every single position. What's it like to be a writer? What's it like to be married and to be in love with somebody else? What's it like to be the object of the love of a famous writer? What's it like to be married to a man whose lover has just written this book about their love affair? What's it like if your wife dedicates her novel to her lover? So I had to put myself in every single position.
Yeah.
And I don't know what you think, but
Mm.
nobody is the villain in this book.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because it kind of, you know, if you're, having read biographies of Bowen, obviously they're dealing with what they know, right? So this, and you're able to go further in fiction. So yeah, I think for the Bowen fan and the Bowen reader, it's going to be not challenging in a way, you know, because it's going to kind of confound your ideas about all of them, actually. And you know, one of the things that I was feeling was, you know, I always knew that Bowen had a complex life, but the reality is when you've got a complex life based on your imagining of it, things basically get complicated. And
Yes, and difficult.
yeah, for everybody.
And I think
Um,
the dangerous thing for me was to see Charles Ritchie as a villain.
right. Yeah.
And in no sense was he a villain. I mean,
Yeah.
the novel opens and closes with Charles Ritchie on his deathbed. And, you know, so in no sense for me was he someone who did wrong. Bowen herself, you know, you could judge her for the way she conducted her life, the way she lived, you know, how she lived, how she accommodated her marriage. But what I'm suggesting is these are 4 adults, all of whom made decisions and had feelings, and none of them were easy, none of them were straightforward, none of them were clear cut. And in some ways, they were neither happy nor unhappy with the results of those decisions.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to see it over a period of time. So I start in 1940, but I end with Charles Ritchie and his deathbed in the 80s.
Yes. And, you know, are you worried about reactions to the fictional aspects of the novel? Is that something that was in your mind as you were writing it?
No, not at all. This is my 3rd historical novel. And I've also, as you know, I write biography and I write literary criticism and literary studies. When you write a biography, you have to be accurate. If you make a mistake, even if it's a small mistake, you feel that. When you write literary criticism, you have to, you know, do a lot of research, look a lot of kind of analytically at work. When you write a novel, you can do what you want. And if you traduce someone, I think, well, that's a problem. If you set out to kind of villainize a character. But if you try and deal with them as any of us are, human beings with sets of emotions. Like, for example, I know you're going to talk about this later, I changed a lot of kind of external facts to their lives to shape the story. A very significant one is the idea that Bowen and Alan Cameron return to Bowen's court completely for for her to complete the heat of the day. That's not what happened, but it suits my idea better that she has left London behind and is
Right.
in a state of longing both for Charles and for London.
Yeah.
So
Okay. That's interesting. Yeah.
I
That's
changed a
interesting.
fact. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no,
Uh,
I did understand that, and we
yeah.
will do a little bit of fact and fiction section in a minute. I've got a few
Happy to
questions
do
for
so.
you.
And I'm because this is a novel. I absolutely, and I state at the very beginning that this is invented. And deliberately, I didn't draw upon any real characters apart from the 4 main. As we'll
Right.
talk about later, I
Yeah.
invented every other secondary character
Okay.
to
No.
make it clearer that this is a novel, an act of fiction based on real lives.
What sort of reactions have you had from, you know, people maybe who you know who also knew Elizabeth Bowen?
Well, I was very fortunate that 2 people I know knew her very well, and one of them very kindly read the novel for me, and she loved her very much and knew her from childhood. In fact, she was at her funeral, and she very kindly gave me, you know, she understood that it was a novel. It wasn't necessarily the woman that she knew, although it made her flooded back her memories of the woman that she did know. And one comment she made was that Elizabeth Bowen in her lifetime had many people around her, whereas I have her very much as a solitary figure.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's artistic license. I want to focus on the inner, whereas this woman who knew her said that she always had people around her, and you know, she was very much wanted by those. You know, she always had a kind of a group of people wanting to be with her, and so she was very sociable.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, it's not a very long novel, and I needed to focus on particular things, but the person who read it for me very kindly, who knew her, said, you know, I reminded myself, this isn't the woman I knew. This is your imagining of her. And I thought
Right.
I'm not setting out to tell a truth. I'm setting out to imagine a story.
Oh, fair enough. That's absolutely, yeah, makes sense. You've also paid tribute to Elizabeth Bowen in each individual chapter by theming it around some aspect of her work, whether it's some of her novels, or section from some of her novels, some of her short stories, or even her non-fiction work. Do you want to talk a bit about how that came about and why you took that approach?
Well, I was planning on writing a full-length study of Bowen, an academic study, and I decided that this is the route I wanted to go instead. I felt that some of the writing I had done over the years, including an essay I did recently for the journal on Bowen and landscape, that kind of expressed what I wanted to say. So I was interested in Bowen's imagined landscapes.
Right.
So both critically, I felt, no, I don't want to write a book. I want to write this essay, and this essay, I was happy with it. Whereas I think with the novel, it gave me a chance to spend time with her. And I was supposed to be obsessed with her. And also the idea was that, well, I felt that I knew her so well, that I have two hats. I'm a writer and I'm an academic. And as an academic, I've worked a lot on Bowen.
Yes.
But as a writer, I'd never written about her. So I thought, well, here, and I titled the chapters after her, they're in tribute to her novels or to parts of her life, Hythe or The Happy Autumn Fields or At the Shelburne, all of these things, A Time in Rome. So but I also use passages from her novels to invent moments in her life. So for example, I have her going with Charles Ritchie for a weekend in Hythe to stay at a hotel when they become lovers. And that's directly taken from, the idea of that is taken from The House in Paris.
Yeah. No, yeah.
I kind of use my imagination and use her novel. And I also have her, of course, having afternoon tea in the Shelburne, which, she wrote about as well. So anything and everything, I suppose, that came from, and I have her in Rome there. So yes. And I suppose, in many ways, writing a novel was easier because I could let my imagination roam free.
Yeah, it takes the pressure of that necessity of accuracy, and all that. I can imagine all the research and checking all the details would be just incredibly tough as a biographer.
Exactly, and you have to do that as a biographer.
Yeah.
I have to tell you also, I wanted to meet her. I was in London last February, 12 months. I launched a novel I wrote on Handel in the Handel House Museum in London, and I was there with a very good friend who's also crazy about Bowen. And we were on a Bowen pilgrimage in Regent's Park, as I know you did that.
Yes, you did.
A lovely trip you did. I was looking at the great pictures. I wish I could have been there. And we went, of course, to Clarence Terrace, and the light was falling. It was getting dark. It was a February evening. And of course, what did we do? We knocked at the door. And I have to say, we expected her to open the door. And we stood there and stood there and stood there. And we thought, okay, we need to go now. This is getting crazy. But
did you get an answer?
Unfortunately not. But we thought she would. But as we walked down towards Baker Street, we looked back, and in the window of her house, of her apartment, we could see a shape, and it was in fact a kind of topiary tree out on a balcony, but it could have been her.
Right, okay. Now, I'll tell you, when we were outside the house, because obviously that was where we finished our walk on the 29th of February, and we were there talking about, looking at the blue plaque, reading some sections on her buying the house from the Glendinning biography, which the original hardcover had a photo of her inside the window. So we were kind of taking pictures of ourselves as if she was looking out. I think he might have been Russian, I'm not sure, but presumably somebody who lived in the house came out and said he had no problem with us being there, but please no photographs. So we were like, we're only about halfway through our stop there, so we were kind of a little bit, okay, but we got on with it anyway. It was kind of an interesting little event in the in our day. But so it kind of brings me on to an interesting question, Eibhear, because you're going, obviously, and now with the Bowen Society, presumably most of the people listening to this will already be familiar with Bowen and Bowen fans. But so how do you think the reaction to the book is going to be between those who are already familiar with the work and familiar with her life versus those who know relatively little or nothing about her?
Yes, it's a very good question. One of the books, I suppose, that influenced me was Colm Tóibín's The Master, It's a book I love. And of course, it's a book about Henry James, who Bowen admired too. And if you know Henry James' life and his writings, there are parallels in the novel. And I teach it every year, but I often ask my students, have you read Henry James and have you read any of his biographies? And many of them haven't. And there are key scenes within the novel which echo James' work. But if you haven't read Henry James, you don't need them, I hope, to sort of, and I think with Colm Tóibín's novel, you don't need the references to Henry James for it to open out. And, you know, I was talking to the editor on this, and I was asking her about various scenes, and she hadn't read some of Bowen, she had read others. And that was very helpful, because I kept saying, if you haven't read Bowen, does this make any sense? Is it standalone?
Yeah.
And she felt that it was, because she hadn't read, say, I mean, I was thinking about this yesterday. The House in Paris, Bowen's Court, and The Heat of the Day, and The Stories and the Demon Lovers, they're a huge influence on my novel. You know, they really are, particularly in Mysterious Core.
Yeah.
That story is key to the novel, because it's wartime London. So I was very much inspired by it, and I cast Bowen and Ritchie as the two lovers in Mysterious Core, Arthur and Pepita in Mysterious Core.
Yeah.
So I use Bowen's fiction to imagine her own life. And I hope the Bowen lovers like myself would enjoy that. But I hope someone can pick it up and say, no, nothing about this woman, I've never read a word of hers, and I hope they just enjoy the story.
Yeah, my thought would be it will work on both levels. I mean, I think there'll be a layer of intrigue for the Bowen fan. I think that the risk, I think, is that they get too caught up in, they forget that it's a novel, right? And
Yes.
that they get caught up in some of the facts. But that brings me nicely on to the a couple of questions I have for you, fact or fiction questions. So ready? So
let's go for it.
Bowen's mother is buried in Hyde in Kent. Fact or
Yes.
fiction? Fact.
It is fact, yeah.
Okay. Is the inscription on the headstone, which you quote in the novel, actually the inscription on her mother's headstone?
No. And because the reason is, it's in Bowen's Court, in the church in Farahy, the inscription is on the wall, and it's to her grandparents, and it says, "Here we have no enduring city."
Ah, okay.
And we, as you know, the last line of Time in Rome is, "Here we have no abiding city, my darling, my darling, my darling." And I originally was going to call the novel No Abiding City. But we went for The Last Day at Bowen's Court, which I think is a better title. And so, no, I invented that because I wanted it to have a resonance.
Okay, very good. I know you kind of already answered this. My question was, did Bowen have a cousin named Angela? And of course, you just said no, it's only the four main characters who are the real ones.
Yeah, she also didn't have an aunt called Myra.
Yeah.
But of course,
she did have a committee of aunts, though.
Absolutely. But I steal that because that's the name of the aunt in The Last September.
Yeah, very good. Did Ritchie stay with Bowen at Bowen's Court and at the Shelbourne Hotel in 1942? He
certainly visited Bowen's Court. I'm not sure if I think he visited during the war, but I don't have any direct. I don't know. I don't think they stayed in the Shelbourne together, or at least I have no record of it. And also, she kept an apartment in Stephen's Green as well. So he certainly visited Bowen's Court, but I don't think he was ever in the Shelbourne.
Okay, I never knew that she had an apartment in Stephen's Green. There's something new.
For a while, she rented a flat there. Yeah.
Very good. Did Ritchie visit Bowen in Rome during the writing of A Time in Rome?
No, and in fact, that caused her great grief. She said to him, she wrote to him a letter, "Oh, darling, please let us have our time in Rome." And they never did. He'd been to Rome, but in fact, she spent most of her time there longing for him. She said so many Roman men looked like him, which in fact they don't. He was tall, sort of kind of elegant-looking man. I don't think Roman men look particularly like him. They're not as tall as he is. But anyway, she saw him everywhere. But in fact, he never went there. But I put them there. I gave her time in Rome with Charles. I suppose it was a way of apologizing for the impertinence of writing the novel by giving her something she wanted.
Very good. Eibhear, do you have a section of the book you'd like to read for us at this point?
Well, Owen, you were suggesting one, so I'll give it a try.
Okay.
And it's a piece I like. It's in fact Charles Ritchie in Bowen's Court. and it's set in May 1942, so it's during the war. After breakfast, and all his letters written and ready for the postman, Charles wanders down the hall. The door is wide open, and a small basket of eggs is left sitting on the steps, with a paper bag perched on top. Charles goes onto the porch to smoke, the sound of the clacking typewriter overhead. Deck chairs are laid out on the wide porch, and ashtrays litter the broad limestone steps. With the advancing morning, he watches as the sun climbs higher across the fields outside and lights up the surrounding ring of trees with a greater, inviting clarity. He noticed that the car is gone, Teresa off in Mallow. Unwilling to disturb Elizabeth, he wanders out onto the porch and down the front of the house. Now the stone of the house, warmed by the sun, glistens, looking as if a glittering powder would come away in your hand. The many windows each looking longingly on the prospect ahead, the avenue of lime trees in confident new bud. He rambles around the back of the house drawn towards the walled garden. Nettles choke the lavender bushes, still without their blue flowering, and the fruit trees cling to the old walls, are beginning to bud. Apple trees along the wall are covered in pretty white and pink blossom, and a few early roses are already showing colour, a lively red here and there. Suddenly, there's the sound of a bell tinkling in the walled garden. He walks to the open door to find a young boy standing there, holding a large, unwieldy-looking black bike, much too big for him. Brown-haired, large sherry-coloured eyes, cheeks flushed from his bike ride. The boy is no more than 10, a little startled by the strange man. Charles smiles at him reassuringly. "Is Teresa there?" the boy asks. "I'm here to get the eggs for my mam." "I'm afraid Teresa has gone into Mallow. May I be of any help?" The boy looks annoyed. "Teresa said to call up today. Mam has a crowd coming in after the match tonight for sandwiches. She needs eggs." Charles smiles. "Actually, I think I can help you to locate the eggs. Come with me." And there's a paper bag which looks like bullseyes sitting on top of the egg basket. The boy looks pleased at the mention of the sweets, obviously his real quarry, but he still looks a little suspicious. "I don't want to disturb Mrs. Cameron. She got back last night, and Mam said Teresa said she's awful busy with the writing." "She is. She's typing away like a fury in her room as we speak. We won't disturb her. Leave the bike there and come with me."
Yeah,
Okay.
it's lovely. Because it's a kind of a lovely it's his first morning at Bowen's Court, and they've actually arrived in the rain the night before, and his impression was it wasn't very positive. I mean, like they were wet, they were cold, it smelled damp, and then when they opened the door of the house, it smelled even more damp. So now he's had his night and he's woken up in the morning, and Bowen is already clacking away on the typewriter in her room, and he's left to explore. And one thing I just to give you a personal reaction, I absolutely love the Irish dialogue in the novel, because it's almost like it feels of a time. I mean, I'm old enough now to remember old people when I was young talking like that, with this wonderful turn of phrase. And it's kind of been lost. It's been lost with my contemporaries, and it's been lost with the next generation, in my view. But I think you've kind of brought that back beautifully in the dialogue of the housekeeper and Arthur.
Exactly. And I'm considerably older than you, Owen, as you know. So
I would say considerably a bit.
Well, considerably so. I can remember, like, as you do, when we were very young growing up, people, our grandparents' generation. And also I want to be very careful with accent, because, Charles Ritchie was Canadian and educated. Bowen was Anglo-Irish, and we have recordings of her voice. And she sounded very much like the late Queen Mother. I mean, the accents were very similar. And it was at that her class. And then Teresa and Arthur, and so I wanted to differentiate those kind of the voices and the accents as much, and I wanted to be careful not to make Bowen sound too stilted.
Yeah, no, it's fair enough. Eibhear, I just wanted to bring you on a little bit to the actual the process of writing the novel.
Yes.
How long was it in your mind for? I mean, obviously you've been working on Bowen for decades now, so
Yes.
Presumably, how long was it? What was the gestation period for this novel?
It was quite short. And I mean, I get subjects for novels. It's kind of sitting in front of me without me thinking about it. When I finished my novel on Handel, I started a new novel about a contemporary novel about someone who's committing a big fraud. And then I was thinking, well, I know Bowen really well. And I know that the publication of the novel very well. And of course, the letters and the diaries are so fascinating. And I just thought, well, I can try that story. So actually, it took me maybe 2 years to write it.
Okay.
And it's the idea, I suppose, I started writing creatively 10 years ago, whereas I've been writing academic work for another 15. So I suppose it's seeing the link between my academic work and my creative work. But in fact, when I began to work on it, it came quite quickly. And I knew what I wanted to do, and I knew where I wanted to write. What I didn't realize at the end of the novel is how much the novel takes place in train stations or in graveyards.
Yeah.
So obviously, they're places I like to go.
So you say in the acknowledgements it was written in Paris. Do you want to?
Yes.
Did that impact the writing of the novel? Can you explain that?
It did. In fact, it was very interesting. I won a writing fellowship to the CCI, the Centre Culturel Irlandais, and it gave me a free month to finish the novel. And it was a very intense period because I was away from everybody and I was away from work. But I got the novel done, and I wrote the final section, Charles Ritchie's account of her death, really. And I found that very difficult to write, very intense. But every day I'd write, and then I'd go out for a walk. Remember, it was beautiful October in Paris. The weather was great. And I went every day to the Luxembourg Gardens in the afternoon to walk and to take some sun and to sit and read. Hadn't realized that's where Ritchie and Bowen met all through the peace conference that in fact his flat was very near there.
Mm-hmm.
So I hadn't realized this, but this was a place that they had spent a lot of time, and they would have known very well. And yeah, getting that time away gave me a chance. I remember coming home being exhausted. Maybe it was the kind of the emotional energy of writing it, but I was very happy with it. And yeah, it got me out of my. But I also spent a lot of time in Rome when I was writing the Roman sections, and obviously London, and I know North Cork a little bit, Farahy very well, and actually even got a scene in Cork City in Kent station. So they were all places that I would have known.
And do you want to tell me a little bit about when you were? Where did you stay in Rome? You were telling, you know.
That's right. I decided to book into the Hotel d'Inghilterra, where Bowen had lived during her time in Rome, and it's vastly expensive. I spent 2 nights there, and it would have cost me. It cost me what, a week in the lovely place I normally stay in, which is a family-run guest house right next to Termini. So what they would have charged me for a week's full lovely stay, I stayed for 2 nights. So I tried to channel her when I was there, and what I hadn't realized was how near it is to Via Condotti. So she was right next to the most expensive clothes and jewelry shops in Europe. And she did buy some things, although she was she was in great financial trouble at the time. And also went to the American school where she had taught, which is right up at the top of the Janiculum. And yeah, followed her and kind of challenged her. But oh my God, I felt the shock of the bill when I left, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it would have been as expensive, but I think when Bowen was there, it was paid for by the British Council, or by the Americans, I think, yeah.
Okay. You know, one thing that you can see how disciplined Bowen is as a writer in this book that you've written, and obviously you've talked about your discipline as well there in your process of writing. You know, did she actually? One question coming back to something earlier. Did she actually struggle to finish The Heat of the Day?
She did. I mean, I've kind of changed it a little bit. I mean, but she certainly found it a challenging book to finish. But I mean, she was writing it. I think she needed that time after the war to finish it, because I suppose she'd been through something very traumatic, which was the Blitz. And also she'd been through something, the most intense love affair of her life. And the two things came together. And we know that during the war, I mean, her house was bombed out. And I mean, she and her husband, they were all in real danger. And she worked as, you know, as an air warden and everything. But that she sent out chapters of the novel out for safekeeping. She posted them out. So like, she knew her house could be destroyed, her furniture, she could be killed, her husband could be killed, Charles could be killed, but it's to protect the manuscript. So I don't, as you'll see as you know from the novel, I have a particular reason why she's struggling. I'm not sure that's actually the case. So I do invent a link between the writing of the novel and her relationship with Charles.
Yeah.
and I
No.
suppose I intensify it for the purposes of the story.
Very good. Eibhear, I've got a question here. The photo on the front of the novel, I mean, it's a
Yes.
fantastic cover. Do you want to tell me a bit about where the photo came from?
Well, it's in fact the publishers found it, Somerville Press, because we had looked at others, and they found it is, I think, through a relation of it, Bowen's, Jessica Rathdonnell, and it's taken in Bowen's court. Now, as to whether it is Bowen or not, I don't think it necessarily is. It's like her, but unlike her. It could be a relative, but I like its ambiguity. I like the fact that it's kind of a glimpse of a woman that may or may not be the woman that we're talking about. That, you know, but I like its unclarity.
Mm-hmm. No, it's
Because
very beautiful. It looks great, actually. I think
it
it's a very
looks great,
appealing book cover.
but we don't know. We don't know if it's her or not, and my novel might not be her.
Yeah, but we know it's at Bowen's Court, right? That's the hall at Bowen's Court.
Yes.
Yeah, it looks like it to me anyway.
It does. I agree.
Yeah. So just a couple of other questions, Eibhear. You know, when did you first become conscious of Bowen as a reader yourself? And then at what point did you become seriously involved in the study of her work?
That's a very interesting question. There's a very good essay by A.S. Byatt, who was given The House in Paris to read as a 10-year-old by her father. And she was too young. And she read it. And her father thought that Elizabeth Bowen was the same as Marjorie Bowen, who wrote historical fiction for children.
All right. Okay.
So her father was giving her books that he thought might be suitable, and he picked an adult book. But A.S. Byatt says that she remembered that she found the book a bit startling, but then she knew that Bowen got the children right. But then as an adult, she read it again, and in her 20s, she read it, and she was very interested in the love affair with Karen and Max. And then later on again, she read it again in later life. So each new age brought a different set of meanings. I read Bowen's short stories, the Irish short stories, when I was a teenager. I suppose I was about 14 or 15. And my mum had them, so I read them. And I remember not liking them, being slightly frightened by the jagged quality of them. There was something, as a teenager, something unsettling about her stories. They were too modernist for me. I liked good, strong, clean, confident stories. But in fact, they're the stories I now go back to. I read Bowen too early.
Yeah.
I'm not sure she's a brilliant writer about teenagers. I'm not sure teenagers... Well, certainly I wasn't able as a teenager to feel comfortable with it. She was too good.
Yeah, no, she requires a kind of a level of concentration, I think, which maybe isn't there when you're a teenager. You need to kind of be really ready to focus.
I also think it's too close. It's too well done for a teenager. I read Kate O'Brien, who I think was better suited, because O'Brien is a romantic, whereas I think Bowen is a modernist. And I think Bowen's work is too good. For me, it was too unsettling. Now, another teenager might have wanted that, but I didn't.
Okay, very good. Can you share your thoughts on how the field of Bowen studies has evolved over the years? Yes,
I've been fascinated by it, and it's wonderful. I mean, one thing is that she's always in print, so that there's always readers. And I think it's fantastic. That's the Bowen Society. And so many of us, are interested in her work and can, communicate. I have a web of friends, and we're just Bowen kind of fanatics, you know what I mean? And, we go on, we're lucky, we get out to Farahee or go to Clarence Terrace or all the many pilgrim sites that they are for us.
Yes.
And, Bowen studies have always been fruitful. I mean, when I began, I suppose the important Phyllis Lasner's work was so important very early on. Then I think Victoria Glendinnings's biography was so, I think, really crucial at kind of fixing her life for us. And a book, there's so many wonderful writers, but a book that's always been very important to me is Heather Bryant's book, How the Heart Will Endure, because How Will the Heart Endure? Because her work was so forensic and so illuminating on Bowen and Ireland. And, to me, the reclamation or the connection with Bowen as an Anglo-Irish writer is so important, because she's not an easy part of our canon. Yeah. And she's part of an Anglo-Irish tradition that certainly in my childhood was a very uneasy one for Ireland.
And that brings me on to my next question, which was, have you noticed a change in Cork and Ireland in terms of how Bowen is recognised and appreciated?
I think there's always been a connection to her in Cork. When I moved here in '91, I mean, the fact that I got to know Mary Leland and Tom McCarthy, and I mean, as writers, both of them understood her work, are so insightful to her work, and I've been so enriched by their knowledge of her work. So, like, there's always been kind of writers of every generation in Cork and in Ireland who've connected to her. But yes, I think things are changing. What really cheers me up is the continued renewed interest in her. Every year a new book.
Yeah.
Isn't it wonderful? Yeah. Every year a new book. I mean, now there's the book that's coming out, with her connection and her letters to Humphrey House. We're learning so much. We get enriched by every new scholarship that comes along.
No, absolutely. And that's one thing that actually, since I've been involved with the society, that's people are constantly reading her, and people are constantly talking about their reading of her on social media, for example.
Exactly.
So it is kind of this buzz about it the whole time that I'm observing. Eibhear, is there before we finish up, is there anything else you'd like to add about the novel that we haven't covered so far?
No, just to say that miraculously it's available. Miraculously, people are buying it. People like yourself, Owen, and I really am grateful for that and reading it. And that the publishers tell me that it's available on Amazon, on Kindle, and directly from them. And just to have readers is what you dream of. And that's all. I'm looking forward to hearing how people enjoyed it, and if they liked it, if they disagree with it, if they have questions about it. I mean, because I learned things from I was so subjectively caught up in my project that by standing back from it, there's also things I don't realize, and
Yeah.
I hope that those who love Bowen's work will feel it's an act of homage, and that it's born from my intense gratitude for the worlds that she created, that I wanted to go into a world that she lived in, but it's a novel and it's not true.
Well, Eibhear, I can only speak for myself, and I can tell you that I've really enjoyed reading it. Here we have it, The Last Day at Bowen's Court. I highly recommend it to anyone, Bowen fan, or someone who's new to her, or someone who just wants a good read. Thanks very much for joining us, Eibhear, and thanks everybody for listening or watching, and watch out for future content from the Elizabeth Bowen Society. Thank you very much, and take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.